thank you so much for coming to be with us today at this
My pleasure.
Summit. You're not that well known in this part of the country yet. You're essentially a Californian, and so why don't you, with your opening remarks, tell us a little bit about yourself. These are union folks who follow these elections and candidates very closely, but you go right ahead, sir, and introduce
Oh, thank you, Vernon. I'll stand if that's all right. Hello, Philadelphia. It's a pleasure to be here. So Vernon said I was from California, which is not right, though I get mistaken for a Californian all the time. I think it's something about me or the way I dress. I was born in upstate New York. My father worked for GE up in Schenectady, and then he generated patents over his career as an inventor. I thought everyone's dad was a PhD when I was a kid, and then I learned the hard way that that was not true. I said, hey, what is your dad's PhD? And then someone gave me a lesson. I'm running for president. Raise your hand if you've heard about my flagship proposal that every American gets $1,000 a month starting at age 18. Now that seems far out. That seems too good to be true. You think that will never happen. But this is a deeply American idea that Thomas Paine championed at the founding of the country. Martin Luther King fought for it in the 60s, and it was what he was fighting for in the day he was assassinated in 1968, called it the guaranteed minimum income. And one state now has a dividend where everyone in this state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that? Alaska. And how do they fund it? Oil. And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology, software, data, artificial intelligence. What they're doing for the people of Alaska with oil money, we can do for everyone here and everyone around the country with technology money. And if you don't think that's possible, I'm just going to give you one number. Amazon's $1 trillion tech company. How much did they pay in taxes last year? Zero. Less than everyone in this room. I can say that with absolute confidence. So you know we're going to have problems if you have $1 trillion tech company paying zero in taxes. If we give the American people our fair share of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, we can easily afford a $1,000 dividend for every American. And I was just telling Danny in the back, I was inspired to run for president by a union leader, a guy by the name of Andy Stern. How many of you know Andy Stern? He's from Philly. Andy Stern was the former leader of the SEIU. He wrote a book called Raising the Floor in 2015. He said, workers are losing on an epic scale. Labor is losing on an epic scale, and we need to change the game so that it works for you all. And his recommendation was that we start giving Americans a dividend from our shared technological progress of $1,000 a month. The reason why I'm running for president with you all here today in 6th place in the polls is because of a union leader. And I know you all have been fighting for workers' rights and fair treatment over the last number of decades, really. The message I have for you all is that what you're doing is not working. We need a game change. And the game change is a dividend of $1,000 a month for every adult. That would be a built-in strike fund for you all. Do you think you're going to be able to negotiate for better deals when everyone's getting $1,000 a month? Think about that for a sec. This is what Andy Stern said. Andy Stern said, if we give everyone $1,000 a month, then workers will actually be able to negotiate on even terms with employers. Because right now the employers have their boot on your throat. They know you cannot go months without a salary, and so they can stick it to you. And even your union leaders who are negotiating on your behalf, they know you can't go months without a paycheck, and so they have to go into every negotiation with that in mind. This is how we change the game to work for you all and the workers of the United States of America. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Let's start by having you tell us about your personal experience with organized labor. Would you describe what you've done in your lifetime to actually help workers join unions for a better life? And please be specific, if you will.
So my career has been in small businesses. And the businesses I worked in were not contexts where there were a lot of union workers. I have, though, fought for organized labor more recently. One of my friends actually was fired from her job for trying to organize an MMA union. How many of you all are MMA fans like I am? This might not be that popular here. So a friend of mine named Leslie Smith, she said, hey, MMA fighters are getting paid 10 cents on the dollar, and in other sports it's 50 cents on the dollar. We should have a union. And you all can guess what happened next. She was fired by the employer because the employer wanted nothing to do with the union. So she then brought a suit against the UFC, and then the National Labor Relations Board certified that, and then of course the Trump administration came and squashed it. So I've been helping Leslie try and get this union certified, and as a presidential candidate, I'm for card check. I'm completely against these right-to-work laws that are making it harder to organize. Because the way I look at it, right now, if you were to look at the big picture, 33% of American workers were in unions in the 1940s. And you know what that number is now, right? About 10%. So you've gone from 33 to 10%, 7% of private sector employees over the last number of years. And a lot of that is because it's very, very hard to organize. And as soon as you have people that are looking to organize, the employer just goes in there, intimidates, bullies, fires, like does whatever they have to make it so that no one wants to organize. So that's what we have to change. We have to change things on the ground floor. When workers want to be able to come together and either join a union or form one, we have to give them a fighting chance to do so.
Thank you. We have for some time now been witnessing the largest redistribution of wealth in our nation's history. While the richest 1% of Americans own 40% of the country's wealth, working families are indeed struggling. They're working harder than ever, but their paychecks are not growing commensurately. Unions help level the playing field for working families. By giving workers a voice on the job, they're able to advocate for family-sustaining wages and benefits, safe working conditions, and pay equity. If you are elected President of the United States, how can you help strengthen labor unions and rebuild the middle class?
I'm a numbers guy, and the numbers tell a horrifying story of what's happened to the US middle class. And the destruction of the middle class has gone hand in hand with the decimation of labor unions. Labor unions are very clearly a force not just for better worker compensation, but also better treatment, better benefits, better hours, things that are becoming more and more rare here in America. Now, the way I see it is that unions are essentially like this fortress for workers that is shrinking over time. You have some victories, but over the historical context, again, you've gone from 33% to 10% of workers. Now, outside of the union fortress, you have the American workforce, where 94% of the new jobs created in the United States are either gig, temporary, or contract work. So just the Uber driver is like the most typical example you think of, but that is essentially the model of American employment now. So we have to balance this out. If you look at my plans, one, we have to get healthcare off the backs of workers, and you all, if you're in a union, you have a massive leg up because your benefits tend to be much, much better than the average American. That's for sure. But we have to get healthcare off the backs of workers to help strengthen the middle class. And then we have to put this economic bounty that is being hoarded, as you said, Vernon, by a very small handful of companies and individuals. The numbers are horrifying. It's something like 57% of the income gains over the last number of years have gone to the top 1%. And so what we have to do is we have to claw back that money in a way they can't escape. Now, I keep using this one example of Amazon, but just reflect for a moment that we have a system where a $1 trillion tech company pays zero in taxes. Whose fault is that? Is it their fault? Not really. Their job is to pay as little in taxes as possible. They have very smart accountants and CFOs going to Jeff Bezos' office and saying, hey, Jeff, great news, zero taxes again. You know, that's not their fault. That's our fault. We have a system that's so broken that our government can get easily outsmarted and gamed by these companies. So my plan to balance the scales is there's a saying where it's like, why did I rob the bank? Because that's where the money was. You guys ever hear that joke? We have to go where the money is. And the money is in the hands of these $1 trillion tech companies that are just sucking value out of our communities. My goal is to take that value and return it to us. And I want you all to reflect on what you would do with an extra $1,000 a month. Just think about it for a second. A little bit of it would float back up to the cloud. You'd buy an extra toaster on Amazon because you've had your eye on that toaster. But most of it would go to daycare, car repairs you've been putting off, Little League signups. It would help build a trickle-up economy from our people, our families, and communities up. And that is my plan to get our middle class back into the position it was a number of years ago in this country.
Recently, the largest oil refinery on the East Coast closed here in Philadelphia, which was obviously devastating for a lot of area families. And while we all want a sustainable future, the pain of that closure is being felt. The energy industry is a source of millions of jobs across this country. Candidates supporting a transition to free energy, green energy, have offered general assurances about a fair and just transition for energy workers into green energy jobs, including union jobs. But the details and timelines are fairly vague, and they differ and vary widely. While the federal government has given out $170 billion in subsidies for windmills and solar farms over the last 18 years, carbon capture technologies are largely ignored, but they are vital for many reasons. What's your message to the millions of workers in the energy sector who care about their communities as well as the climate, but who deserve a clear answer from any aspiring president about what their environmental plans mean for the energy workers, the rank and file? Would you call for effective 45Q tax credit implementation? How will your administration handle these critical issues of the environment and jobs, sir?
So the question's a crucial one, and it's about how we make the transition to the 21st century economy. Historically, we subsidized fossil fuel companies. I'm going to stand again. Historically, we subsidized fossil fuel companies to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. And now it's time for us to move towards a more sustainable economy, a more green economy. How many of you all are parents like I am? So we look at our kids and we're concerned about the state of the world we're going to leave them. I used to think we were leaving a really rough situation for our grandkids, but now it's ourselves and our kids. The last 4 years have been the 4 warmest years in recorded history. July was the warmest month in recorded history. I was supposed to have a rally here in Philadelphia this summer, and we canceled it because of a heat wave. It's like 110 degrees, and the last thing you want to do is have people stand outside for a couple of hours in 110-degree heat. So this is the big picture of why we need to make the transition. The tough part is, as Vernon's suggesting, there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who work in these sectors that rely upon them for their livelihood. And of course, it has nothing to do with them that we need to make this transition. One of the big themes of my campaign is we have to help workers make these transitions more effectively. And right now, the resources are not there. So what I would do is I would take some of the subsidies that we would apply to wind turbines and solar panel companies and say directly, for displaced or transitioning energy sector employees, we're going to have a runway for you. We're going to have a cushion. Because if you have a plan that's in the hundreds of billions, you need billions of dollars to help workers land on their feet. And this may not, I don't know if you all represent truck drivers here, but one of the biggest things I'm concerned about is the transition to self-driving cars and trucks, where you're going to have hundreds of thousands of Americans who drive a truck for a living. And UPS just invested in $1 billion self-driving truck company that already has robot trucks on the highways. So I'm going to suggest the numbers. The savings for automating away all those trucking jobs are estimated to be $168 billion a year. So what you would do is you would take some of that $168 billion a year and help truckers make effective transitions. So they're not going from an average pay of $50,000 to zero or near zero. You would do the same thing in the energy sector. So you'd say, look, if we have hundreds of billions of dollars to make this transition, you'd set aside billions for workers so that they're not stepping off a cliff when we decide that their jobs, unfortunately, are going to not be needed anymore. And the hope is that some of these energy sector employees would be directly employed in installing solar panels and creating wind turbines and other forms of energy that we're going to need moving forward.
Thanks to the collective voice and bargaining power of organized labor, many union members can today count on high-quality health care coverage for themselves and their families. How specifically will your health care plan protect and build on or enhance union members' access to quality health care coverage for which they have fought for so hard for so long to win?
Again, you all are very, very advantaged relative to most American workers in that the nature of your health care benefits tend to be much more robust, in part because when your union negotiators work on your behalf, this is one of the main things they're driving for, because they know that you really want quality health care that you can rely upon. To the extent you have a concern in this realm, it is likely that these benefits are not going to stand the test of time because your employer or former employer is going to go bankrupt or somehow wriggle out of these obligations. That is the concern. So to me, the big move that the government can make is to say, look, to the extent that union workers have fought on behalf of healthcare benefits that you need to rely upon into your retirement, that we need to have a backstop available so that if your company is unable to live up to its negotiated obligations, that the government will assist in helping them do so. Because you can't have, in my view, tens, hundreds of thousands of American workers who put in years of hard work for healthcare benefits that then disappear underneath their feet. That is not American, and that will not happen if I'm president.
Mr. Yang, your answers have been very succinct, so we'll have time for 2 questions from audience members. Are they lined up and ready to go? If so, let's hear your name and your affiliation and your question for Mr. Yang.
Mr. Yang, thank you. My name is John Fundis. I'm the Vice President of Local 52, Motion Picture Studio Mechanics, IATSE. I'm very proud to be here. I'd like to ask you about the wealth disparity in this country. It's never been higher. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. We've never seen anything like this. CEOs are receiving astronomical compensation packages while employees are told to do more with less. What will you do to rein in the CEO compensation and ensure that workers are receiving their fair share? And I thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the ratio of CEO to employee pay has gotten completely out of whack to a level that we've never seen it before. The problem right now is that our capitalist system is engineered to do, frankly, exactly what it's doing right now. That is the brutal truth. Our capitalist system is designed to maximize shareholder profitability and stock market prices. And there was a time in the 1970s, let's call it, where if a company were to do well, then you could assume that the company was going to have to hire more workers, it was going to have to give them good benefits and treat them well, it was going to have to care about what happened in its own backyard because the people that lived in their community were important to them because they lived there too. Now none of these things is true. If you have a successful, profitable company today, you can do more without hiring many workers. You can automate away a lot of those workers. I spoke to a group of 70 CEOs in New York and I asked them, how many of you are looking at replacing your back office clerical workers, your call centers with software? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70. The truth is you could fire that CEO if they did not use the software and get rid of the workers. The CEOs are doing what the incentives are designed for. So the big move we have to make is we have to change the incentives. Our system's working too well right now. I'm going to quote a friend of mine, Eric Weinstein, who said this. He said, "We never knew that capitalism was going to get eaten by its son, technology." That is where we are today. We're competing against technology that can do the work that we've trained for years and do it more inexpensively and more inefficiently, and then the CEO's incentives are all about maximizing the bottom line. So the transformation we have to make together, and unions must lead on this, is we have to say, look, the bottom line is us. What good is record high GDP in a country that also has record high suicides, drug overdoses, stress, anxiety, and a life expectancy that has gone down for 3 straight years? Do you all want to know the last time life expectancy declined in the United States of America for 3 years in a row? The Spanish flu of 1918, global pandemic 100 years ago. We are there again now because of financial stressors and suicides and drug overdoses overtaking vehicle deaths. The only way out of this mess is to actually change our very underlying measurements so that instead of the CEO maximizing their company's profitability, our system is designed to maximize our health and well-being, our children's education and success rates, clean air and clean water, our mental health and freedom from substance abuse. This sounds fundamental, what I'm suggesting, but GDP is something we made up almost 100 years ago. And during its invention, the inventor of GDP said we should never use this as a measurement for national well-being because it doesn't work for that. And here we are 100 years later following GDP off a cliff. As your president, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and say, look, GDP, 100 years old, really out of date, kind of dumb. If you have people dying younger and GDP going up, which one is right? Clearly, life expectancy is more important, so we're going to change GDP to reflect how we're doing, our health and well-being, our children's health and success, and knight it the new American scorecard. And then you can hold CEOs accountable and say, look, you have your profitability, yes, but you also have this scorecard. You also have your environmental impact. Right now, the CEOs are doing what the incentives are telling them to do, and we have to change their incentives.
Time for another question from the audience. Your name and affiliation, ma'am.
Hi, thanks for coming today. My name is Karen Ford Steyer, and I'm with the American Federation of Government Employees, AFG Union. The current administration is rapidly undermining federal workers' collective bargaining rights. What's worse, they've had little or no pay raises for years. They're under constant fear of government shutdown, and they're constantly being asked to pay more for health care. What will you do to restore morale, improve the rights of federal employees? Would you support the reinstatement of the Federal Labor Management Partnership Act?
Thank you for the question. My flagship proposal would give every American worker a $1,000 a month raise, or $12,000 a year, and that includes federal employees. So think about what $12,000 a year would mean to everyone who's working in the government. Would that be a game changer? And many of you think that this is impossible, that the Asian man is talking magic. But there is nothing stopping the majority of citizens in a democracy from declaring ourselves a dividend. They did it in Alaska almost 40 years ago, and it was a Republican governor who did it. So if we get federal government employees a $12,000 a year raise, that would be a bigger raise than they've seen in quite a long time. And the goal then, again, if we change the measuring sticks for the economy, the problem so many of our workers find themselves in right now is that they're being framed as costs, essentially. So teachers are an example. You say, oh, teachers, like you're an expense. And what we have to do is we have to start seeing our own well-being as the best investment you can make. We know that teachers are worth their weight in gold, and that if you have a good teacher in the classroom, it ends up impacting hundreds of kids and their outcomes. So the same would be true of the federal government. If you have government employees who are helping make our society safer, more secure, healthier for our kids, and solving the biggest problems of our time, then those are investments. If we change the way we measure economic well-being, then we start seeing the people who are strengthening our society not as costs, but as people who are doing the most important work that's being done today. And I like to talk about my wife, who's at home with our 2 boys right now, one of whom is autistic. What is her work calculated at right now in our economic measurements? 0. And we know that's the opposite of the truth. I was off the trail for 2 days taking care of our kids, and you know what I said after 2 days? Get me back to doing something easy like running for president as soon as possible. And if you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. Parenting is the hardest, most challenging work that's done, and yet we value it at 0. And the same is true of many of our government employees, the same is true of our teachers. We have the measuring sticks all wrong, and it's killing us. It's driving us into the ground. If we change the measurements to measure what's important to us, then we can reframe our economy for the 21st century in a way that lets people see what the important work is.
Mr. Yang, thank you very much. We have time now for your closing remarks, so I open the stage up again to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Vernon. Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. Really, again, the DNA of my campaign is in the labor movement. And when I was talking to UAW workers a number of months ago, one of them gave me a DVD, it's a DVD, of the origin of the UAW. And I watched, with my wife, fascinated, the story of Walter Reuther and how he founded this union and he was shot in his own home. His brother was shot and lost an eye. And this was what the fight for workers' rights looked like not that long ago, in the mid-20th century. This was the great rise of the unions throughout the middle of the 20th century, and that rise has unfortunately reversed itself over the last number of years. But watching this documentary had a profound impact on me because I saw just how brutal and difficult the fight for workers' rights can be. You are right now fighting that fight. And the question I want you to ask yourselves, are you winning or are you not winning? And if you don't think you are winning, then think about what would help you win. We have to change the nature of the game. One of my rules in entrepreneurship and life is you have to give yourself a chance to win. Not lose less, not hold on for a longer period of time, but actually win. And that is the flagship proposal of my campaign, is to change the game, change the rules of our economy, and rewrite them so that you can win. So thank you all very much. Thank you for having me today.